Good afternoon, relax, I don't intend to offend anyone. Come here by the thousands, even by the millions. I really don't care, but there are a few other things I do care about. That's why in today's episode, in what style do Poles explore Croatia? Who usually comes here? Do we like to spend money? Or maybe we're frugal? What language do we use to communicate? Do we drink a lot of alcohol? And by the way, the eternal conflict, Karlovacko or Ozujsko? And for dessert, do Croats really like us? Without longer intro, let's begin. Maybe a word of explanation. Who am I really to judge us Poles? What are we like abroad? What are we like in Croatia? Well, for all the new viewers, let me explain. I've been living in Croatia almost a year now. I went through the entire season here from start to finish, so I was able to pick up on some of our typical behaviors from a slightly broader perspective than just a 1 or 2 week vacation. So I'll start with a somewhat sensitive topic, our personal culture. We Poles, when abroad and generally on vacation, tend to be extremely loud and shouty. Maybe not as English people. I don't quite know where it comes from that even in a standard situation, when a family is out for a walk, a woman with a man, a married couple, and with children, it's already clear that it's a bit different. With children, it's always going to be a bit louder, and that's completely understandable. But often, when we talk to each other, when we communicate, we are extremely loud. And it's not that, don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm picking on the Polish language because it's my native language, so naturally I notice it much more often and in much more detail. No, we really are loud. The same goes for behavior at the beach. The same goes for restaurants, for evenings spent on promenades here in the local towns. We really are loud, and in general we draw much more attention to ourselves than other nationalities. We are just too loud sometimes. It's not just that there are a lot of Poles here during the tourist season. There are a lot of Czechs here, a lot of Hungarians, and above all a lot of Germans and people from the British Isles. So it's not entirely the case that we are heard because we simply have a significant presence in numbers, in reality. The truth is, we're just loud. And I don't know where that comes from, but generally, when I hear our people, our beloved fellow countrymen, I automatically quiet down a bit myself, because I just don't feel entirely comfortable with it. It's not that I'm ashamed, but unfortunately that's the truth. So who mainly comes to Croatia for vacation? Of course, only wonderful and young people like me, jokes aside. But in truth, the typical standard tourist from Poland is usually a family with a child, or few of them. Most tourists I see in Croatia are families with children, couples or married people in their 40s and 50s. That seems to be the most common group. From what I've observed, the smallest group of visitors is actually younger people, those in their 20s or 30s like me. It's something that stands out, especially in places that seem perfect for a younger crowd. For some reason, young adults are the minority here, which is a bit surprising. Somehow I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it comes from the belief that Croatia is still considered very expensive. But believe me, there are many more expensive places in Europe where, for example, young people from our country eagerly travel. In the case of Croatia, I haven't noticed it being like that. Maybe an exception is, for example, Makarska, a very resort-like place, a very party-oriented place by Croatian standards. So maybe there you do actually see a bit more young people. But I think that might be due to the fact that people usually come to Croatia by car, and nowadays among young people there is, I don't know if it's a belief or simply a lack of need, that a car isn't always necessary in situations where, say, a couple is living together. They don't always have a car. Likewise, people rarely come here alone. Most often it's families or groups of friends traveling together, but it's rare to see really young people. Now, a very sensitive topic. Do we like spending money? No, not at all. Sorry, but I think we're just really tight with money. Starting with the fact that many people wonder before going to Croatia, especially when traveling here by car, which route to take. We usually wonder whether to go through the Czech Republic, Austria and Slovenia to Croatia, or maybe, for example, through Slovakia and Hungary. On the Facebook groups where I'm also quite active, I've read so many posts about where vignettes are cheaper, where you can refuel for less, and so on and so on. And often people choose, for example, the route through Slovakia and Hungary because it turns out they can save, I don't know, 20 or 30 zlotys on vignettes. But it's not even about the fact that they'll be driving 2 hours longer. I myself belong to the group that recently has been traveling through Slovakia and Hungary, but not because of the savings. It's because when I used to drive here alone, I would get really bored on the Czech and Austrian highways. Or rather, I would get bored because I also know that road. And Slovakia and Hungary give me a bit more relief when it comes to being a driver who still has to cover those 1700 kilometers one way. So generally, we tend to skimp, we cut corners, even when it comes to things like eating out. Many of us don't really like spending too much money at restaurants here, so we end up bringing various food products from home instead, just to save a bit more. I even read on internet forums about Croatia that some people, I don't even know, prepare meat in jars, just to take it with them, just so it's cheap. Of course, they'll say things like, but I like it, or my stomach can't handle the food there. Fine, you can believe that if you want, but it's just an excuse, a really cheap one. Of course, you can try to understand it in your own way, but I think that most of us Poles save up that money very hard all year just to be able to afford that very expensive, incredibly expensive trip to Croatia. So the question is, why do we even go there? Wouldn't it be better to just go to somewhere like Albania and Montenegro where it's supposedly much cheaper? Either way, we really do regret spending that money, even when it comes to beer. Imagine this, I've seen reports of people bringing Polish beer with them because they like the taste better. Okay, everyone has their own taste. And honestly, if something reminds you of home or just hits the spot, who am I to judge? There's something comforting about the familiar, especially when you're far from home. But for me personally, those most popular beers in Poland are just average, not terrible, just nothing to talk about. That's true, sorry. Just to save, I don't know, a zloty or a zloty and a half on a can of beer just to get drunk and save, what, 50 zloty over the course of the trip? That's insane. The thing with the most popular local beers, namely Ozujsko and Karlovacko, is that there's no absolute truth here. Each one, of course, has a different taste. If you asked me and just told me I really had to choose between Ozujsko and Karlovacko, then I'd have to say Ozujsko. Sorry, Karlovacko fans, it's not a bad beer for a mass-produced one, but it is, after all, a mass-produced beer. I've already touched on the topic of this beer in many conversations, that generally we like this beer here on vacation because it brings back good memories. But if I have to answer, Ozujsko or Karlovacko, honestly, I'd say neither of them is really worth it. And I'm not trying to start any arguments here. If you're already in Croatia, it's worth checking out some local beers. You can find them in markets like Tomi, Spar or Konzum, and they usually go for around 1.70 to 2 euros. So not only do you get something new to try, but it's also pretty affordable. I know that several years ago, to find any local beer in Croatia, you had to search a bit. It was a similar situation to what we had in Poland when small brewery or specialty beers first started to gain some popularity. Here that moment has already arrived too, so you can easily find local beer and of many different kinds. There are really a lot of great beers here, basically of every possible type, so if you're coming over, well, I don't know how much you plan to drink on vacation, maybe 10, 20. But even if, I don't know, you end up paying 5 zloty more for each one, then it's, what, an extra 50 or 100 zloty over the whole vacation. Are you really insisting that Ozujsko or Karlovacko is such a must-have? Seriously, open yourselves up to other flavors. I opened myself up and I'm really satisfied. And from here, we transition very smoothly, very naturally, to the age-old dilemma that many Poles face. Namely, the question of how much alcohol we actually drink here, and whether we should be drinking it at all. It's a topic that comes up often, and honestly, the answer is quite simple. Yes, we drink a lot here. You can definitely observe it not only in restaurants or pubs in the evening, but honestly the nationality I most often saw on the beach with alcohol, which is strange, were, unfortunately, Poles. Just so it's clear, I'm not denying my heritage. We really do love to booze. Of course, this is nothing new, but here in Croatia I think it's more than obvious. A very interesting anecdote. Some time ago this year I did a photo shoot here with a group of really cool young Poles who were visiting Croatia for the very first time. At the end of the day I asked them how they liked it, what their impressions were, and of course they shared what they enjoyed, what stood out to them and all that good stuff. But at the end I said, "Now, alright, so now we know what you like." Very standard answers, nothing surprising. "And what don't you like?" They said, "Coals." Well, excuse me, really? Was it really like that? So of course I pressed them for more. So I asked why Poles? And it was basically a repeat of what I mentioned earlier. That we're noisy, we're loud, and we have no moderation when it comes to drinking alcohol. We simply don't know when to stop. Maybe that's why we're so loud. I don't know where it comes from. My perspective on these things has shifted a lot lately, and honestly, it sometimes just annoys me. Sure, it's lovely to sit on the beach at sunset with a small bottle of wine or a beer, soaking in the relaxed vibe. But let's not make it the main focus. It's about enjoying the moment, not putting the alcohol front and center. Of course, no one is going to punish you for it, but overall it doesn't look good, and then things happen the way they do, and we end up with the kind of reputation we have. Speaking of opinions, I promised at the beginning of the video that I would also tell you what Croats think of us, whether generally speaking, Croats like us. And of course, everyone who comes back from vacation there, well, let's say almost everyone. Of course, there are isolated cases, some so-called anecdotal evidence, that Croats don't like us because someone treated someone else badly. That kind of thing happens everywhere in the world, so let's not generalize. Generally speaking, absolutely. Someone comes back from vacation somewhere and says, "Oh my God, Croats are so lovely, so helpful, they say they like Poles," and so on, and so on. Let me turn the question around a bit. What do you think? People who generally make a living from tourism here, and people in a country where so many Poles come in large numbers, what are they really going to say? Will they be unfriendly, rude, vulgar? Will they not want our money? Will they not be helpful, and so on and so on? Of course they'll be helpful. Of course they'll be nice. Of course they'll say they like us. Generally speaking, I'm not saying living here, being here, that it's any different. In general, I always exercise a certain degree of caution when I'm abroad. But I believe that Croats overall are very kind, very friendly, helpful and pleasant. I think that if a Croat doesn't like you or has some kind of issue, they'll definitely send you a clear signal. You won't have to read between the lines. You can feel it. I think it's simply due to that typically straight-to-the-point approach, but also mixed, of course, with that southern vibe. So, yeah. I think, of course, that Croats generally well, I don't know if they have a good opinion of us, but I think they like us because we leave a ton of money here. That's the truth. Now, I think this might be an interesting topic for you, and maybe in a way a new one, because not everyone even pays attention to it. Namely, what language do we use to communicate here on the spot? Is it English, or do we actually know the basics of Croatian and try to connect with the locals in Croatian? Not really. Usually we try to communicate in Polish. I really don't know where this comes from, but we as a nation here in Croatia have this habit of assuming that just because in some places, like restaurants, someone greets us with "good day" in Polish and even knows some basic Polish, we can speak Polish everywhere. Well, actually no. In my opinion, it would still be appropriate to know at least the basic things, so that we make a slightly better impression right from the start, whether it's when entering a restaurant or some other place. But generally we tend to think that everyone here speaks Polish. Let me tell you a little anecdote. During one of my visits to a store, it was the middle of the season. It wasn't a store located in one of those places with a lot of tourists. It was more of a store for the local population. Of course, there were a lot of tourists during the season too. But I saw this couple from Poland approaching the bread section. And the Polish man, without any hesitation, just assumed that the lady working at the bread counter spoke Polish fluently and said something like, "Good morning, dear lady, I'd like that little bread with those sesame seeds, please." The one right next to the cornbread? Yes, that one. Really nice. It looks like it has a crispy crust. The woman is just standing there, completely stunned. She has no idea what's going on. The guy too, you can see he's just baffled, staring. They're just communicating with their eyes, but without any clear idea. And so they just stand there and stand there. And finally the guy catches on that maybe that's not what it's about. No, sweetheart. Not that bread. No, not that one. It's the one next to it, where there are 3 of them lying there. That one that looks more like it has that golden kind of crispy crust. Because I think it's not completely soft. It's kind of more baked through. Everything Polish. No way. I mean, seriously? And, okay, I'm not saying we should know how to order bread in Croatian, and not everyone has to speak English there either, but come on man, have some mercy. At least point at something slowly, try to communicate in some other way, but don't just assume that they speak Polish here. Of course they don't speak it, sure, they might know some basics here and there, but that's not because they want to, it's because they kind of have to. The fact that there are really a lot of us here every year doesn't mean that Croats will be fluent in, say, German, though they can speak German very well for various reasons, maybe even historical ones, but let's not expect them to just speak Polish with us. So let's try a bit harder and maybe put in a bit more effort, because it really doesn't take that much more energy. That's my opinion. So I don't know. At the very least, maybe try using English, because honestly, I have to say that here in tourist areas, Croats speak English really well. Maybe even better in some places than Poles, because even according to various independent rankings, it's shown that Croatians have an exceptionally high level of English, sometimes even higher than ours. Indeed. Surprisingly, even in a small town somewhere, I came across a situation where a woman, around, 50, 55 years old, in some bakery that was clearly more for locals than for tourists. She communicated very fluently in English. Of course, I think that among young people it's not a problem, but as I mentioned earlier, there really aren't many young people here. How do we travel? Do we actively explore Croatia? Do we actively discover it? Or do we just sit on our butts in one place? Well, I just think that if someone comes for a week or two and tries to enjoy one town, it's completely understandable that they don't want to travel from town to town. Because now that I've been living here long term, I'm only just beginning to understand that truly exploring a place is only possible when you actually spend a bit more time there. Of course, there are exceptions. We go to Split for a day trip, which is where I'm currently recording from, just for one day. We go to Dubrovnik, but when we settle down in a nice place, like Brela or Makarska, we really want to soak in everything the place has to offer. And for example, the following year, because we Poles often return to Croatia for vacation year after year, we might choose a different place. Although I also know of situations where someone has been coming to the same town every year for 10 years. Personally, I can't imagine that, but it's also hard for me to picture a situation where we drive here in our own car and decide to stay in just one place. It's quite an interesting topic, but I think it's also connected to the south, that when we come here, we just switch into this relaxed mode where basically nothing bothers us. We don't want to go anywhere, just stay here and unwind. So I completely understand that. The inspiration for creating this video was a question asked by one of my viewers, Łukasz from Poland. Warm greetings to you and thank you very much for that question. He wrote to me like this: do you ever find yourself seeing Poles on the street behaving badly, so you don't admit that you're one of them, and sometimes when approached, you even pretend to be a local and start speaking Croatian or English just to avoid a conversation? Łukasz, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. It does happen to me, and more often than you might think, but not because I don't want to talk to our fellow countrymen. It's just that, to be honest, I generally don't really feel like talking to people. But honestly, it's really about the fact that once I left Poland, I get this kind of wild satisfaction from not having to speak Polish too much when I'm out and about. Although it does happen, sometimes I get approached when someone figures out that I'm from Poland. And here's another little anecdote from the beginning of my stay here in Croatia this year, in May. One evening I'm just chilling on the beach, listening to music, of course quietly, so as not to bother anyone. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone kind of thinking something over, looking at me, watching me. Alright, so I just keep sitting there and chilling. Eventually, he mustered up the courage and came over, and at first he tries speaking some broken English, and then, when he sees I'm not responding, he switches to some broken German. I look at the guy and I already know, just from the way he's dressed and his face, that he's Polish, so I say, "You can speak Polish," and he lights up with joy. Oh damn, he actually used a different word, but I respect my viewers. So of course he was absolutely thrilled to meet someone from Poland, especially before the tourist season even started. It's not that I don't want to talk to our fellow countrymen, right? Just no, only when I felt like it. And I'm saying it's not that I don't. No, actually, maybe not. Yes, sometimes I switch to English, for example, so people won't realize. Maybe I'm not such a good person after all, like you think. But I think I am. I think I am, because if you are here watching, it means you like it after all. So if you're here and you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for everything. Goodbye.